Hiya, my name's Adrian Roos. I'm one of the exercise staff at the Knowsley Community Cardiovascular Service, part of Liverpool Heart and Chest. I'd like to cover some of the basics of the Mediterranean diet. Before I do, I think it's quite important to say that as with all individual, and also without sounding too patronising, you're a special population. You may have other comorbidities such as diabetes, or it could be that you may have some kind of intolerance to some food. So obviously take some of the things that we say when we're doing some of these education sessions try and maneuver things so you do things your own way, in other words, so have a little bit of malleability about them. So what I would like to say to you when we're going through these, make sure that you go through some of the material on your own and go through some reputable websites which we can talk to you a little bit about at the end, and try and get a good all-round understanding rather than just one source, because when we talk about this kind of thing at the moment, it is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour and we don't manage to get all of the information in. But as I say, let's go through some of the basics. So to start off with, Mediterranean diet, it has got a lot of scientific basis behind it. Also, a lot of historical depth. It's not a new fad, and it's rather synonymous with colours, taste and aromas, and I say it's a long-term embracement. And it's also considered a natural diet, especially by those long-term living around the Mediterranean, especially around the southern Europe, northern Africa and western Asia. Now this next slide, as you can see, it's called the Eat Well Guide, or you may have heard it in the past called the Eat Well Plate. It's not a particularly new concept. I've been working in community for years, and this has always been prevalent. Now, as you can see on this, which is quite purposeful, the colours are quite bright. And other things you have a look as well around there, it doesn't just include the food, it includes things like the food labels, which we'll talk a little bit later on a further slide, and also your water intake. Now, just a quick talk very, very quickly on the water intake, particularly because you may have conditions that you may be limited to how much water you should intake. So I think many of you may have heard of the 2 litre fluid intake for a 24-hour period. Now, you may well be told by your health professionals or one of your nurses or doctors, if you have got some of those conditions, especially, not a nice term, but especially people like heart failure patients, you may be told not to go to the full 2 litres. So be very careful when you see things like 6 to 8 glasses of water a day, because this may go above your permitted limit. Now, the other things that you can see on there as well, you'll notice that the plate is broken down quite considerably into large segments. So you'll see a third approximately is fruit and veg, another third are carbohydrates, and at the bottom there you'll see all the other things such as beans, fish, chicken, the milks, which obviously is all your dairy products, etc., and like your oils and all the good stuff that you might call like your crisps and your biscuits, ice creams. Now, I'm not going to go into all those in depth now. We will cover again only briefly in further slides. And as I say, on the top left there you can see some traffic light system based on the food labels that you may be able to, or you may want to start having a look at, so you do know what your intake is. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you. Okay, this next slide, it's pretty much trying to break down what the Mediterranean diet's all about into a little smaller segments, and also into something you can read where you can say, yeah, I can change those small things I'm going along. So remember, it's not just about the big change, it's about the small change. So if we were going to break it down, we'd look at things like this. You might be quite surprised as well when it comes to your 5 a day. If you have a look, obviously your 5 a day is your 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. If you have a look online and again at some other sources, or if you want to talk to us, you may find how surprised you are at how easy it is to implement these things into your everyday diet. And again, it includes things like your beans, pulses, nuts, whole grains, etc. And one of the big messages from the Mediterranean diet is try and do things from scratch. The good old-fashioned way, trying to make things in bulk. Don't just do one meal. Can you do things over a week, etc. Another key message is to lower the red meat intake, and whether you can replace those things with things more like chicken and oily fish, and not necessarily always oily fish, but different types of fish. Try and get a bit of variety into your diet. Try and lower your lard and butter intake, and try and go for the spreads and oils obviously that may incorporate the unsaturated fats, olive oils and rapeseed. And I think this goes out saying, you may want to look at with these meals, so you are going to try and do them in bulk or make them over longer periods, so you can replace having to make fast foods when you're in a rush or ready meals. Also with dairy, milk, cheeses and also things like creams, try and go with the lower fat option if you can do. And again, in one of the, I think it's in the myths section at the end, I'll talk about, is lower fat always better, because it might not always seem what it says on the label. Try and lower your salt intake as well, especially when making, cooking or eating your food. Try not to add any salt at all unless you have to. And can you change your snacking culture? Instead of having crisps, biscuits, sweets, those kind of things, can you have a look and can you have some dried fruit or fruit and nut, or even fresh fruit, even better, but try and substitute them for other things. And lastly, you may be surprised to hear, alcohol is allowed, but try and stay within your limits. Unfortunately, fellas, it's 14 for men when it comes to units as well as the ladies now, so that has changed over the last few years. Have a look again online and you'll see about the health benefits of cutting down on the alcohol intake. Thank you. Okay, fruit and veg. Now, fruit and veg, it depends where you go and how you cook them and how you want to eat them, but generally it's accepted to try and eat them as fresh as we can. Now, if you're anything like a lot of people, especially if you've got quite a few people in your household, trying to eat fruit and veg freshly, apart from storage, the expenses, it can be quite expensive trying to keep up with that. So don't worry too much about it all being fresh. Remember, you can get tinned, you can have dried, and also you can have the frozen. So try and bring it into your diet and don't worry too much whether it is fresh. One of the important things about, or a couple of the important things about fruit and veg are the antioxidants and fibre and the vitamins and minerals. And these are the things that we need for our body. They're catalysts. They help our body stay healthy and function normally. Now, 5 a day, what does that mean? Don't get too hung up about trying to get the guidance of the weight. For example, an apple is an apple, a banana is a banana. Or if you have some, for example, sultanas or cranberries, just go with a handful. Don't worry too much about trying to go with weight. And again, we'll talk about that in another minute or two. The big message here is try and get an array, nice colours, because the more colours you have, obviously you're going to get the better properties those individual foods. So remember, colours are important. As a little side note, as I said earlier on, it's quite important because you are a special population and you've come to us for certain reasons and you're on different medications. This leads us to a couple of those things that you might have in your 5 a day. And for example, grapefruits. Now, and the juices as well, they can have an effect on some of your medications, especially those statins and calcium channel blockers. And also your blood thinners, foods that are high in vitamin K, and they're foods that are the green leaf, such as the kale, sprouts and broccoli. Now, what I would say, always take your doctor's advice, and you've got your nurses here specifically for cardiac reasons, so talk to us. Talk again to the medical professionals, and if you're unsure, bring a list in of your medications or talk to one of the nurses and we can go through those individually. In regards to fruit and veg, a question we get asked a lot is to try and get these nutrients into our system quickly because we're always in a hurry or we've got something to do. Is it okay to have things like smoothies, or is it okay to have juices? Now, unfortunately, with juices, because when they are produced, when they're made in the factories, they lose a lot of the fibre and the sugar does increase when they're made, and because of this it can obviously lead to things like tooth decay. So the guidance is, even if you had 5 different fruit juices a day, it would still only count as 1 because of how they are produced. Now, as we've mentioned so far, if you are trying to incorporate these things into your diet, try and find different ideas of how you can do it. We've mentioned so far frozen, tinned, dried, those types of food. They're absolutely fine, but you may even want, don't try and eat them on their own. Try and mask them a little bit by putting them into nice stews, or it doesn't matter if it's just once a week or so you're having a good roast dinner. A roast dinner, if it's done in the right way, you can get good nutrients, such as you can get good fats in there. You can get your 5 a day if you try hard enough, and there's a good source of protein. So don't think that you have to have these things individually on their own. They are good as a mix. Just one thing to say as well about potatoes, a bit of confusion. They are a starchy food, so they are very important as part of a diet because of that starch, but they don't count towards the 5 a day. Understanding fat. I think to start off with, possibly the most important thing to talk about is the calories, or are the calories that are in fat. Now, I don't want to get too technical because it can make people turn off, but when it comes to calories, it's very true that fat has the most calories compared to all the other, what we call macronutrients. And again, I don't want to get too technical, but if you think of proteins, carbohydrates and fats, protein has got 4 calories for every 1 gram. Carbohydrates, which get a very bad press, have only got 3.75 calories for every 1 gram. Yet, if you look at fats, they've got approximately 9 calories for every 1 gram. And the reason why I say this is important, there's a lot of push to try and get people away from the saturated fats, the animal fats. And if you think of the fats that go harder or more firm at room temperature, such as your lards and your butters. But from a weight management point of view, which this isn't really to do with this talk, but it does incorporate it, the calories, even from the better fats, your polyunsaturated, unsaturated fats, they also have 9 calories for every 1 gram. So, even though some fats are more equal than others, they are better in moderation in your diet, the potential to put weight on with better fats is still there. So be very careful from a weight management point of view. So that covers the calories, which I think is very important. But as we say, try and make an effort to try and reduce those saturated fats, because traditionally it's those saturated fats that we're trying to not eradicate, you can't do it totally, but we are trying to reduce and replace with those other fats, the polyunsaturated, the monosaturated fats. By having a look at the next slide, it breaks down some of the fats into the saturated, which are the ones, again, in moderation they're okay, but traditionally the ones that are described as increasing your likelihood or increasing your profile of having coronary heart disease. And if you look at there, under the saturated fats column, you can see the things we've been talking about so far: butter, lard. We hear people talking about dripping years ago, suet, the hard margarines, etc. If you look at, and obviously at the bottom there, pies, pastries, cakes, etc. So it's those kinds of foods. That's why we're trying to get you to the correlation. We're trying to lower your fats because of what or where you find those fats. If you have a look at the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, you can see they're the ones traditionally that are used within this Mediterranean diet, and they may have a heart protection. And again, you can use those in your cooking, and we've got examples here. If you ever want us to, if you're interested in some of the things we've spoken about so far, we do have links where we can send recipes to you via either emails, or we can send them over to you in some kind of link. Okay, I'd like to take some time just to have a look at the fats. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the points on these because it's not a reading test, and as you can see, the common theme amongst those points on that slide in the tips to cut down fat are about reduction. Not all fats, as we've seen so far, are made equally, and they are absolutely essential to health. So it's not about taking fats out of your diet totally, because obviously, yeah, as we said, they do have the benefits. But it's about trying to get rid of some of the fats that are bad for the health, the saturated fats, the trans fats, and trying to swap them, as we said so far, for the better ones. But remember what we said, especially if you're looking about weight and you're trying to have a weight reduction program, they are still the same calories, whether they are the better fats or the fats that you're trying to cut out. So don't make the mistake of trying to increase fats just for the sake of increasing them because you've taken others out of your diet. Now, when it comes to your fats as well, I think it's quite important to make the basic changes first. As we said there in some very brief detail about taking things like the chicken fat off, or obviously taking the rind fat off the bacon. Not like some people where they say, oh yeah, I cut it off and then they eat it later. It's about getting rid of it and try not to consume that fat at all. Also, you have a look at things like if you go into wherever you go shopping, whether it's the big retailers, you'll notice that things like mayonnaise, I think that's a good example. They have different coloured jars of mayonnaise. The branding has been changed, the colour, to represent what type of fat content it's got. For example, you'll see the normal mayonnaise packaging's usually got quite a navy blue colour, and the lower fat ones have a lighter blue. Don't get too caught up in this at all, because humans, when we eat, we like to, like any animal, we like to taste things, but we taste things for a reason, in the sense that we use, for example, sweet taste to tell us if things are ripe. So from a safety point of view, for when we were eating very primitively a long time ago, we would know these things are ready to eat. So our taste buds dictate to a large degree whether we like to eat something. And where am I going with this? Well, what I mean by that, if fat is often taken out of the ingredients, very often something else is put in, sugars or salt, to appease that reduction in the fats which taste good on the palate. So that's why it's really beneficial if you can start to look at your labels and educate yourself about what to put in your trolley, rather than just going by what the manufacturers who are trying to get you to buy something. I know it sounds very cynical, but before you put it in your trolley, educate yourself about what goes in there. Cheese, for example. Now, again, I say I don't want to go to all the examples on there, but cheese is another example of, it's got good nutrients. It's got things like calcium, and it's got things obviously like protein. And for some people, those are a deficiency because they're not getting them from other areas in the diet. So if you were to take the cheese out of your diet, you may be taking the goodness that may be your main contributor to your overall diet, if you see where I'm coming from there. So be very careful what you do take out. And just for as a general knowledge thing, I didn't know if you know that all cheeses are now made in Israel. Yeah, they're called cheeses of Nazareth. Okay, bad joke, but I had to get that in there. So make the small changes first. Don't try and make all the changes at once, because this can take a long time. Have a look at the food labels, which we'll go on to in the next slide. It's no secret, most of us know, that salt is a contributor to elevated blood pressure. Unfortunately, it's one of those foods that are more easily to take out of the diet. Now, most foods have some kind of benefit to our health, and salt is one of those. So many people say, well, why would I want to take it out of my diet? Well, because it is a food that's often prevalent in many of the foods that we eat, especially from a process point of view. It's already there. So the trouble is, we add more salt to the preparation, the cooking, and actually when it's in front of us on the plate. So try not to add any more salt. And again, this is one of those examples where if you can start to read food labels, which we will go through again in a few minutes' time, if you can start to read what's on the back of those labels, you may be able to identify where the salt and what the main culprits of the salt are. Now, some of you may be glad to hear, or see from what you saw on the plate on one of the slides earlier, that alcohol is also on the list, where it says, yeah, in moderation, you can have some alcohol. Now, it's that word moderation, very, very ambiguous. There's a lot of conjecture around what is the right amount of alcohol. And even though you can't get it right for every person, because remember, we all react differently to different intakes of food and drink, there are now guidance, or there's guidelines I should say, put forward by the government, and those guidelines are put forward to try and help us put a limit on the amount of alcohol we consume so it's not adverse to our health. Not long ago, men were recommended not to go beyond 21 units a week, and ladies was 14. Now, like it or not, over the last few years, gents have been asked to reduce their intake, and it's now recommended not to go over 14 units, so there's parity now between the genders. Now, you'll see on the slides there what is deemed to be 1 unit of alcohol, and if you have a look at the units of alcohol, very often it's on the back of the labels. Now, even if you get the small bottles in a pub, or if you get the wine bottles, and often in the bars as well, it'll have like information in places that you can have a look. So try not to get into the habits, because you know it's a fluid. People tend to neglect that. With it not being a food, you think, oh, it's a fluid, but there are many, many calories in there. In pure alcohol, which you wouldn't be drinking, but in pure alcohol, there are 7 calories for every 1 gram. Therefore, it's between proteins and fats. Remember, fat's got 9. Pure alcohol's got 7. Now, yes, as I just said, reiterate, I know you don't drink pure alcohol, but from a calorie point of view, it is still quite dense. So if you are on a weight management program, again, that might be one of the areas you may want to start reducing. Food labels, or reading labels. It's not the be-all and end-all. You don't have to read labels, but what it is for some people, it's a good tool to know what they're putting in the trolley before you get it home. And one of the good reasons for that, if you are trying to change your eating habits, or you may be on a weight management program, not very often, or most people should I say, can't really get home watching television. Adverts may come on, or make a cup of tea, and they know that those foods that they're trying to cut down are in the fridge or in the cupboard. Because the temptation's already there, very often willpower will start to fall through, unfortunately. So the good thing about the food labels, if you are in the supermarket and you're able to read the labels and make an informed choice, it's not the nanny state. We're not trying to tell you what to eat. We're asking you, have a look at what you put in your trolley before it gets to your house. So in that way, you're taking the temptation out of the equation. Now, food labels, as you can see there, the most important factor is the colour. So if you look at the traffic light system, we're looking at green for better. We're looking at the medium choices, the ones that can go either way. They're in the amber. And obviously the higher food contents, such as the salts, the fats, the salt, they are in the red. Now, they are usually based on 100 grams in your food, or 100 millilitres. And very often, most of the time, you will see it like that when you read the label. So you usually see 100 millilitres, 100 grams on the label. And underneath, it'll have quite a lot of information. And this is teaching you about what to look at in that information when you want to make your informed choice. Unfortunately, there's always a downside, isn't it? There are some foods, whether they're made like this purposely to make them confusing, I can't answer that. But some things are in black and white. It totally negates the traffic light system, which they are supposed to be. They are based on different grams. For example, it could be on 30 grams, or it could be proportion size. So sometimes you may want to have a look without putting it off, because sometimes there's a bit of maths involved where you have to work things out. Sometimes it's not always that easy, but most of the time it will be based on 100 grams, and you will be able to work out the colours by looking at your label and what's on theirs. Also, don't worry about using this label all the time. If you notice, we are creatures of habit. Depends where you shop. You may notice you always shop down the same aisle. You've done it for a long time, until the shop turns them all around and keeps you guessing again. So you've got a different way of shopping. But when you get to know what these labels are and the foods that you've decided to eat, you'll probably find you don't need that label again. You may not even get it out in the supermarket to walk around, which it won't make it look obvious of what you are doing. So if you do need any help with these, we can give you a link. We could print one off, or if you want to print it off yourself, or even just get it out on your mobile phone and have a look at the label on your phone when you're going around the shops. Because those pitfalls, and because some things can be quite confusing, for example, they break things down, for example, sugars. They could be called fructose, glucose, maltose. It's very deceiving sometimes. So if you ever want us to go through any of the team, whether it's the label, what they mean, or what you're supposed to be looking for, let us know. We could even print one off for you, and we'll go through a few things with you. To finish off with, I think it's important just to say that even though we're talking about the Mediterranean diet, there's no such thing as the perfect diet. And through the ages, there's been different types of diet that have always told us that this is the diet to follow. But I think with the Mediterranean diet, because of the scientific background that comes with it, and as we said at the very start, because it's so diverse and there's a lot of choice in there, it is a nice diet to follow. And from a cardiac or cardiovascular point of view, it's got an awful lot of backup or a lot of proof to say, yes, this is good for you. I think also, when it comes to myths over the years, and they're those myths that you always seem to crop up, and I'm not going to try and answer them now because time, and also it's down to choice. For example, butter is better. Well, it depends who you are. Butter is natural. Yes, it does have saturated fat. It does have a large amount of calories, as does margarine, but it still has things like your vitamins A, E and D, for example. So it's not that it's a bad food. Like many other foods that you might hear, oh yeah, that's bad. It's how you eat them, how often, and also in what kind of manner you eat them. Do you put it on 4 or 5 pieces of bread a day? Do you add it to all your foods? And again, we could say that by quite a few foods. Again, it's for you to try and change your diet into the mould that you want it, but that is for the better for your health. So start to have a look at a few of the facets in your lifestyle and how you can change them, because there's no such thing as a bad food. Again, if we look at carbohydrates, they get a really bad, over the years I should say, they've had a really bad press. They've always been classed as fattening. And if you look at the calories, that's just not true, because it's got the least amount of calories in what you call macronutrients, your proteins, your fats and your carbohydrates. They've got less fats than proteins and carbohydrates. But if you look at the manner in which we eat carbohydrates, such as jacket potato, for example, we may add butter, or we may add mayonnaise, or it's the same with things like pastas. What kind of sauces do you add to them? Again, not bad foods, it's how you may be preparing them. So again, have a look. How can you change those things? Even eggs, it was said at one time, no, can't have more than 1 or 2 eggs a week because of the cholesterol. Because they're so versatile and cheap and adaptable, eggs are a really good source of vitamins, minerals and protein. So again, have a look. As long as you're not eating and eating and eating dozens of eggs a week, and again, that would be like many foods, add them into part of your balanced diet. We're here to help. We hope that's helped with displaying how some change in your diet may not be a total overhaul. You may find that you're on the right track. There's just a few things you want to tweak. But as I say, we are here to help. Whether it's a weight management point of view, or whether it's just getting the right nutrients, and also to remember, this is what we're doing this for, it's to lower your risk of further cardiac events. And food is one of the major contributors where you can help lower your cardiac profile. So as I say, if you do need any help with sitting down, going through a food diary, whether you would like us just to get you some diet sheets, Whether you'd even like to be referred to a weight management program or to dietitians in Knowsley, there is a service out there run by the NHS. We could refer you to them. And we also have websites if you're the kind of person who would like to do things on your own, but in an informed way, with the freedom of the choice for yourself. We've got a website there, a 12-week program, again, that goes through these things. It goes through lifestyle issues, it goes through the recipes, it goes through including things like physical activity and also the nutrients of how you should be following things each week, about how you can reduce your diet and reduce your sugars. I'm not going to go through any more. As I say, the team's there to help, and I hope this has been informative. Thank you.